are talking today about a very, very important topic. And a lot of talks are happening, even right now at COP26 in Glasgow, about this impact investing. I'm happy to be here on the stage with people who are actually making this happen. So my first question to you is, how do you make it happen? What does impact investing mean for you? And how do you adapt to the current realities within your sector? Amee, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having all of us here today. It's really nice to be here. My name is Amee Parbhoo. I'm the Managing Director of Accion Venture Lab. We are a seed stage inclusive fintech fund, so we invest globally, particularly in emerging markets, in fintech for good, companies that are bringing financial services at scale to underserved populations, small businesses and consumers around the world. Impact investing is the heart of what we do. It's very much the focus on that double bottom line, bringing social impact, measuring, tracking, thinking about the impact we can have, but then also focusing on financial returns. So, coming to both together. And really the pandemic has only, I think, highlighted the importance of the work we all do in impact investing, but particularly in financial services. We've seen in our work the 3 billion people who are underserved by financial markets are struggling to rebuild their small businesses, their lives, but at the same time, they're also able to access digital tools in a way like never before. So we're seeing the access to digital finance, digital financial services just expand globally. So that creates a huge opportunity for those of us in the impact space due to the pandemic to really think about how do we use that as a foundation to bring services to the populations we care about.
Thank you very much, Amee. Let's move forward. Seth, please present yourself.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Seth Bannon. I'm a founding partner at a VC firm based in San Francisco called 50 Years. We back companies at the intersection of 3 circles on a Venn diagram, where circle number 1 is deep tech, which just means you probably need a PhD on the team to pull things off. Circle number 2 is path to $1 billion a year in revenue if things go really well. And circle number 3 is path to massive positive social or environmental impact. And for us, impact investing really just means realigning capitalism away from selling people more crap that they don't really need towards addressing the truly important problems in the world. A world where $1 of profit equals 1 unit of good. In our minds, capitalism is one of the greatest levers for change the world has ever seen. But unfortunately, the vast majority of capitalism in front of us is causing the destruction of the world, is causing health issues by feeding people poison, and is promoting consumption that's completely needless. So we would love to see a world where capitalism was pointed at addressing things like the climate crisis or disease or malnutrition or connectivity or inequality. And yeah, so that's our definition. And then COVID has, for a lot of the companies in our portfolio, been a huge accelerant. We back a lot of companies in the synthetic biology space. We actually had 14 companies that within 2 months of the pandemic were able to begin to actually address the pandemic by increasing testing capacity, by bringing new therapeutics to market, or by being able to better detect what was happening in the pandemic. And so it was amazing to see when you're building things that address needs and not wants. When a really big important thing happens, you tend to be able to contribute pretty quickly.
It sounds so simple, but it's not simple at all.
Right.
Kyle, tell us a little bit about Mission One, please.
For sure. So Mission One is an early stage venture fund, and we invest in frontier technology, really focused on ESG and climate tech primarily. And so for me, how I look at impact, it's really, and especially in relation to venture, it's really about looking at larger macro existential threats and then seeing those as opportunities for innovation. So the 3 threats that we really focus on are, one being climate change, so the warming of the planet, the deforestation, different, all the climate, issues that are going to happen in relation to that. Resource sustainability or depletion. So, as populations get larger, our need for finite resources currently are going to continue to increase, and therefore there's be issues around, land, water, air. And then the third one being inequality. So the gap between those who have resources and those who need them is continuing to widen as a third existential threat. And so, all those three really provide multiple opportunities for innovation across the board. And so I think COVID, what it's really done is help to change people's mindset to realize that, an existential threat like a pandemic can really have massive changes on the way we live, work, and play. And so I think that's really helped to set a backdrop of understanding that we need to really start addressing those. And so and that's given way to a lot of amazing technologies that really have solved for some of those threats that I mentioned. So I think COVID has been again an existential threat that really has changed the mindset that I hope and has really created a lot of opportunity as well in our space.
I like that we see opportunities more than challenges in the current, definitely not a simple situation. Thank you, Kyle. Christian, you have a very extensive experience. So what impact investing means for you, and what experience did this period bring to you?
Yeah, so I'll be controversial given the name of the panel, but I actually hate the word impact because it has this connotation that you're doing it for philanthropic reasons, that you will put social ESG outcomes above financial returns. Yeah. And I am 100% convinced, I'm 100% capitalistic, B, 100% convinced that technologies that make the world more sustainable and resilient will outperform financially in the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. So with the new fund called 2150, we are focused on trying to make the planet more efficient, resilient, and sustainable. And beyond 2050, which is the Paris year, so that's why 2150. And stealing Seth's name as well. And we focus on materials, we focus on the pipes that flow in and out of cities, energy, how we build, how we heat, how we cool, and how we keep urban inhabitants healthy, safe, and secure. And we invest mostly at Series A, some earlier, some later. We're based in Europe, but we invest worldwide. And in terms of COVID, so something that shocked me during COVID is that the world stopped, right? We all went into lockdown, we stayed home, we didn't go to the office. And yet the average building in downtown London was still consuming 70% of its average energy consumption, which is ridiculous. There's nobody in the building. Why? Because the contract between the tenant and the landlord stipulated that the average temperature always had to be in this range. And so the AC and the heating had to be on while nobody was in the building. And that's just a great example of systemic failure in our kind of legal system where a building that's not being utilized, a resource not being utilized, is still being wasteful. So how do we find enough of those problems and start tackling them one by one?
You've been working before for some very famous companies, big names like Facebook and Microsoft and Google. And now you are working for another type of business. In terms of impact, or whatever you call it, investing, who do you think are the main actors who can push forward this big change? So
I wrote a blog post about this last week. COP26 will be the COP that put climate tech companies and corporates at the forefront of the fight. I don't know what's going to come out of this negotiation with governments, but even if nothing comes out of it, I think this is the first time that where the companies realize they have a role to play and climate tech entrepreneurs are front and center. And I'm hopeful that that accelerates. In terms of leadership, Unilever has always been ahead of the game. Obviously, Amazon and Microsoft both have a $2 billion and a $1 billion fund for climate tech, and they both have pretty aggressive commitments. Actually, when you look at climate tech companies, and I'd love to get Seth's view on this, in most of the ones that I've looked at, a tech company is usually one of the first customers. And that just means that they're more willing to accept innovation, deploy it, and they have massive amounts of assets. And they're also contributing significantly to carbon emissions and footprint. So the corporates have a massive role to play, and the regulation, especially in Europe, is pushing them to act faster.
Yeah.
Do you want to add something, Kyle?
No, I was going to completely agree with what Christian said, and I think it's kind of a three-legged stool. I think on one side you have the government all the government entities who really have to align and really provide the regulatory framework in order for corporates and entrepreneurship to really happen. You have the corporates who, right now, like you mentioned, there's a lot of tech companies who are really leading the way and voluntarily either tracking their carbon emissions or finding ways to offset their carbon emissions. But they're really creating a groundswell of other types of corporates as well who see the benefit and or the pressure that's coming from consumers or their investors in order to do so. And then the third one being the financial sector, whether it be the private sector like us or even the public sector. I think, at least from a U.S. perspective, when Larry Fink talked about, there be a tectonic shift in the way the capital is being deployed towards ESG strategies. Since then we've seen a hockey stick really of public market flows into ESG-related companies and changes in the way people look at their public market portfolio. And we're seeing the same thing in the private sector. As well, as ESG is growing, somewhat 5 times faster than the broader VC market. So I think that's kind of the three-legged stool that's really providing for that.
And I think if you go one level deeper and ask why is Microsoft and Amazon and Stripe doing what they're doing, why is Larry Fink doing what he's doing, I think largely it's driven by the young talent at these companies. Right? So millennials, Deloitte does a survey where they ask millennials, what is the purpose of business? And a plurality will say that the purpose of business is to improve society or protect the environment. So more say that than say anything about money. There was a survey done of Gen Z, and it found that 90% of Gen Z believe that a company must work to address social or environmental concerns. And so what you're seeing, starting in Silicon Valley, but now even moving to New York City finance, is that a lot of the millennial and Gen Z workers at these companies are asking their leadership, what are you doing about this? This is an existential crisis. Like, we have resources, we have cash, we should be contributing, and they're voting with their feet. Facebook's had a horrible time retaining employees, and it was starting to creep into Amazon, into these other companies, and for sure into New York City finance. And so any of you that work for a company that has resources, that has financial capital, that has human capital, you should be asking your employers these questions too, because you can absolutely have an impact.
Well, and just to add, I think building off of this, I think we're starting to see the same, for that same reason, entrepreneurs start to care about this and leave the company. So I would say, don't just go talk to your employers, leave your employer and go start a company that's going to be building something that's good for the world and actually profitable and scaled. Because I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in our portfolio, the reason they're building an impact-oriented business, many of them don't even consider themselves impact businesses, is because it's so central to what they care about and what they think is good for business. In financial services, we know that financial institutions are the least like institution that we all have to engage with. We don't like our banks. But what we do like is we like tech companies that are driving new products, retaining us in different ways, engaging us in different ways. That's exactly what low-income, underserved communities around the world want as well, and that's what fintech companies are building. And so I think that same shift we're seeing is what's driving a lot of the innovation in the world.
No, this honestly excites me so much in the space. I'm working in the blockchain crypto space, and the community of people who actually react quickly, the speed of flexibility and adaptation to changes. This is what characterizes the current generation. But still, in my opinion, we're very much behind of the changes that are happening around us. So which tools, which instruments could we use in order to shift the mindset? Because we talk a lot, we prepare plans for a lot of projects, but we are still so much behind. Kiel, I saw on your website that made me think about the power of story. Like, the first thing that you see when you open Mission One website is a coloring book about the father's love. This is a very simple thing that actually underlines a very important problem in our society. What other powers do you have in your possession in order to influence this change as quickly as possible?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think storytelling is a huge point. And it's interesting that people who are getting into sustainability, like whether it be the Gen Z, and millennials, really realizing that it's a values-driven approach, and like they're looking at it from the alignment of their values and ESG, and then using their whatever their superpower may be, whether it be deep tech PhD understanding to start a company in that space, or whether it be storytelling to help to bring the narrative of how it should be really be painted. I mean, we talk about the nuance of impact investing versus maybe sustainable investing and what those titles might be to really draw the right crowds in to really affect that change. And so I think everyone has that capability to bring their skill set to the table. I mean, you know, when I was talking to a startup that's really in the education space to help to retrain people to be able to go and get climate jobs, for example. And they mentioned that there are 2 million people who understand climate and could actually work in this space, but we're going to need 100 million people to actually really be working in this space. And so that delta for them is obviously the opportunity, but there's a lot of people who don't come from climate who will bring their skill set to the space, whether it be on the founding side, whether it be on the project management side, on the marketing side. So I think there's a lot of ways to kind of really attack the challenge.
I actually think it's the wrong question. The question was, how do you change people's minds? I fundamentally believe that at scale, it's just really hard to change people's minds and behaviors. And so the real question is, how can you let people think what they want to think and do what they want to do, but have it not be a problem anymore? So, you know, we have a test we call the Mr. Burns test, where any company that we're backing that's, say, building something in the sustainability space or health space or any space, we ask, would Mr. Burns, who's the sort of prototypical greedy industrial capitalist on The Simpsons, would Mr. Burns buy the product at scale? Right? Just because it's the cheapest, best, you know, most convenient, tastiest, and then, oh, by the way, it's sustainable. Right? And so if you look at Tesla, you could say, oh, Tesla has convinced people to buy electric cars, but no, they haven't. They took people who wanted to buy super sexy, really fast, really high performance cars, and they sold them one that happens to be sustainable. Prius did the same thing. Prius didn't convince people, hey, you should buy an electric car for the environment. They went to people who wanted to save money on gasoline, and they said, hey, check it out, you can save money on gasoline, right? And so I think the way we should be thinking about things, especially as technologists and venture capitalists, is not how do we change minds or behaviors, but how do we let people do exactly what they're doing, but have it no longer be problematic because the products that we're building and selling to them are sustainable or are healthy from the get-go.
Love that.
And honestly, this is what's happening with the climate change narrative, because in the end, the planet will live and survive even if we destroy ourselves. So in the end, it's not about climate change, but it's more about the humanity on the planet. But it doesn't seem working very much, you know, in terms of convincing people to shift their mindset or adapt to this new changes. Amee, what are the tools that we have in our possession in order to make this shift happen?
Yeah. No, I really like this point that, and we see this in financial services all the time, people like aspirational goals, right? Everyone is aspiring for something. And I think when you're reframing around aspiration rather than, you know, need or here's what you're going to give up, that's going to really help drive about the change that you want to see. I think it also is around showcasing more success stories. There are actually a lot of companies out there, a lot of successful entrepreneurs who have been able to kind of drive real impact while also being a unicorn, you know, and how do we create more of that in the narrative to say success isn't just that they're a unicorn on the cover of all these, you know, companies, but here's also that impact, and it brings in the storytelling. But I've seen across our markets, you know, what inspires entrepreneurs to get started is that they're success stories that they can look at, their role models, they're people that they kind of admire, and it doesn't have to be, you know, just the greedy capitalist who's doing no good for the world. It can be both, and I think that'll make a difference too.
Christian, anything to add?
Yeah, so we talked a bit about climate tech, right? The problem is that climate tech is like this massive amorphous thing that nobody really understands, and you hear different stories. Eat less meat, drive electric, use soy milk instead of cow's milk. And the challenge is that none of those individual levers will actually get us out of the problem that we have. So there's a MIT simulator for climate change, which I really encourage everybody to play with, and it maps where we're headed to, which is 3.6 degrees. And you have all these levers you can move. You go fully electric on the cars. You electrify all the buildings and factories. You stop coal to zero and oil to zero. And actually, even if we do all of those, we're still at 2.6 degrees. There's only one lever that actually moves it by a full degree, and that's a high carbon tax. And that's not very popular in the US. Europe already has ETS at $40 a ton. Companies are already beginning to implement shadow carbon pricing along their regular P&L. Yep. That is unfortunately the single action that will drive the most impact, but you still need 1,000 other technologies and solutions to be deployed at scale.
Yep. Thank you very much. And I think a very important tool that we have is gathering together, sharing our ideas, exchanging our views. And thank you very much, Web Summit, for bringing us here together. Thank you very much for reflecting with us on this important topic. Thank you very much.